Throughout history, people have used torture devices to punish their enemies and those accused of crimes. They've also used torture as a means to elicit confessions or convince a victim to give up other people's names, despite the fact that torture doesn't produce reliable information. Yet sometimes, people looking toward the past have let their imaginations run away with them when it comes to torture. Ancient Greek historians have passed down some fantastic tales that they may not have intended readers to take literally. In addition, people in the modern era have accused medieval Europeans of using gruesome torture devices that probably didn't exist at the time, perpetuating the myth of a less-than-civilized so-called Dark Ages. Here are the worst punishment in human history. Rat torture is a graphic and terrifying form of torture in which the victim is subjected to agony at the hands of rodents, specifically rats. It is defined by the introduction of rats into an enclosed area, typically a cage or container, along with the victim, and subjecting them to extreme conditions. Fearful or hungry, the rodents use the victim's body as a means of escape, turning them into torture tools. The pain caused by the rat torture is severe both mentally and physically. When rats see the victims up close, they become aware of the imminent threat. Even more terrifying than the physical agony can be the anguish and anxiety brought on by this awareness. In their desperate endeavor to get away, the mice, driven by their instincts, bite and claw at the victim, creating deep puncture wounds and intense pain. Rat torture has a particularly severe psychological effect, since the victims must put up with constant physical suffering as well as constant fear due to the rodents' unpredictable behavior. This kind of torture is horrifying because it combines pain, fear, and a sense of helplessness. Rat torture has been applied historically, frequently to force confessions or as a form of public punishment. It was used in Europe during the Middle Ages as a means of execution and torture. In one notorious historical instance, prisoners of war were tortured with rats during the Vietnam War, resulting in serious bodily and psychological harm. Capital punishment by the convict's head being crushed under an elephant was a very popular method in ancient India, and also in other parts of Southeast Asia. While elephants are revered in Buddhist and Hindu faiths to this day, their specific use as medieval executioners remains lesser known. Although capital punishment in the Middle Ages was unilaterally cruel, death by elephant almost seems too gruesome to be real. Most commonly used in Southeast Asia, death by elephant was known as Gunga Rao in India. Standardized in the Middle Ages, this medieval execution method occasionally found its way to the Western world and only saw a decline in popularity in the 19th century. Typically, death by elephant was relegated to enemy soldiers or civilians who committed crimes like tax evasion and theft. As one might expect, these executions relied on the brute force of an elephant to crush a victim, usually by pressing on their head or abdomen with a foot. However, sometimes executioners came up with more creative approaches. For example, one Delhi Sultanate turned the deaths of prisoners into a public spectacle, where elephants were trained to cut people open with pointed blades fitted to their tusks. Blood eagle might be the worst torture method in the history of mankind. This concept was also shown in the Vikings series. This ritualistic punishment was saved for those who had either committed the most horrible crimes or were enemies of the Viking society. It was regarded as the height of cruelty. It was an inhuman and gruesome show of power and vengeance. The blood eagle was a graphic and disturbing procedure. The victim would have their back sliced open along the vertebrae while they were tied and lying face down. The executioner would next pull the victim's lungs and ribs out through the wounds, forming an outline that looked like an eagle's spread wings. The victim would die as a result of this agonizing and drawn-out procedure, typically from a combination of organ damage, shock, and blood loss. The blood eagle was a gruesome and notorious form of punishment because of its violent character and the ritualistic aspects of its execution. It was practiced during the Viking Age, which spanned from the late 8th to the early 11th century. It was a time of complex myths, battles, and raids. The blood eagle has mythological associations and is believed to be inspired by the stories of Norse gods and legends.